This is a 1967 Triumph Vitesse, and if you're feeling really generous, you could call it one of the world's first super saloons. It's a variation of the Triumph Herald launched in 1959, and afterwards Triumph found themselves with a really good looking little saloon car and a straight six, the one later used in the TRs. I think you can see where this is going. And so, Triumph shoehorned the straight six into the little Herald, employed Michelotti to give it a fresh new front end, and in 1964 the Vitesse was born.
Of course, the engine wasn't the only thing that had changed. You got a close ratio uprated 4-speed gearbox, optional overdrive, although not on this one, an uprated differential, standard disc brakes at the front alongside uprated springs, and at the back you got bigger drums.
But the standard swing axle and leaf springs at the back made wet roundabouts more exciting, shall we say, than they should be.
The Vitesse was never a perfectly competitive car, and you could argue that was due to it being already obsolete when it was introduced, and that's down to the stunted development of the original Herald, which was planned to be a much different car underneath than what it became. Triumph wanted a unibody construction, but nobody had the capacity to build it at the time, so they ended up with a body on frame, but that's all a story for a different time when I eventually do a Herald. Despite more technologically impressive competitors, the Herald and the Vitesse were both successful for Triumph in what was probably their best ever decade. The popularity of these classic cars is a testament to the simple, reliable engineering and enduring 60s style.
But despite its mechanical shortcomings, the Vitesse looks brilliant and has a great soundtrack thanks to that straight six engine and the gearbox. Have a listen. So let's have a look at that straight six, but it doesn't have the most conventional of bonnets, these Triumphs. So you have these on each side that lift up, and then the entire clamshell lifts up, which means the best access to the engine you'll ever find in pretty much any car.
The original Vitesse made 70 horsepower from its 1.6 litre engine, but that wasn't quite good enough, and so the straight six was bored out to 2 litres. Now you had 95 horsepower to play with in this particular car, but this was later upgraded to a 104. Bear in mind this car weighs 940 kilos. This all meant that straight line performance was about level with some of the proper sports cars of the time, like the MGB and the Sunbeam Alpine, both of which had about 100 horsepower.
Not only is the engine and the front suspension really easy to work on thanks to the entire front clamshell lifting away, but also the transmission tunnel unbolts so you can get to the top of the transmission from inside the car. So therefore this is one of the easiest cars to work on ever, in addition to the really simple engineering that went into it. Part of the transformation from Herald to Vitesse was this front end, and it's moody and aggressive and suits the character of the Vitesse much better than the standard front end of the Herald would. I'm not 100% sure whether it's better than the Herald front end, but it still looks brilliant. Of course, these Dunlop alloy wheels are not original to the car. They're 13-inch ones, but they look fantastic. And the look of this car, saloon shape, it's just accentuated by these fins here on the back of the roof and these enormous fins here on the back. It looks unbelievably impressive, this car. Giovanni Michelotti did a brilliant job, and cars like this are the reason why I think he is the best Italian designer. And yes, that will be controversial, but I really think he is, because this car and the Dolomite I've just done a video on, they're all fantastic. And yes, that panel gap is a proper panel gap. They're all like that, sir. It's fine. Now, if we have a look in the boot, which is quite spacious to be honest, and of course the fuel tank right here in the boot like all 60s cars are, and fuel tap. Fantastic, you don't get that on modern cars, but then again, you don't need it either. And underneath here is the original, well, one of the original steel wheels that would have been on this car. So that's what this car would have had from the factory. Obviously, it now has the brilliant Dunlop alloy wheels. Apart from the panel gaps, which are evident, this car doesn't feel like it's the best put together car in the world. Yeah, I'm not so sure. But it does look good, doesn't it? And now I'm inside the Vitesse. There isn't really very much room here at all. For the pedals, I'm in the right position, but I'll show you this in a different camera angle actually in a minute. But the steering wheel, right up against my legs, far too low, and quite close as well. It's just weirdish kind of driving position. I'm sure it's a bit more evident now that that's really very close. And look at where the pedals are. My foot wants to go for the clutch pedal, which isn't great. The pedals are so far over to the right, it's not even funny. But the dashboard, this lovely wooden dashboard with a mismatched ashtray there, you know, 60s. And tachometer, speedometer, lovely warning lights in the bottom there. Temperature gauge and fuel gauge, just the basics really. You have your lights on this side, you have your indicator on this side, and your horn in the middle. Of course, you have all these pull buttons for the wipers, washers, etc. And lots of other buttons that I have no idea what they do. No idea what that does, shall we see? No idea. Anyway. Ignore the siren, I can't do much about that. But in the glove box, which is tiny, we have lots of paper and, yes, Vitesse 2-litre owner's handbook. I'll have a look through that in a minute. And as I've already said, very good quality. And the owner has fitted a vacuum gauge, which is always very fun to look at when you're driving. And beside it, the 4-speed manual gearbox. No overdrive on this one, just 4 speeds. And this is a close ratio gearbox, obviously with the Vitesse, and it's got a really nice shift to it actually. It's a really, really nice little gearbox. But it is spoilt by this weird driving position. And of course, as with all cars of the time period, you get quarter lights and not very much else on the door. Of course, this little door pocket here, you can't get very much in there. And the window winder is right down at the bottom here, so it's in... Yeah, I don't think the designers in the 1950s really thought about the people who were going to be sitting in the car. But oh well, it's one of those things. One thing you do get in the passenger footwell, I'm not sure whether you can see this or not, is this big storage area here. I'm not sure what that's for. It looks like you could put an umbrella in it, but could you fit a full umbrella in the footwell like that? I'm not sure. And the seats themselves they're quite comfortable, but there's not very much support to them, and my back's already starting to hurt here after sitting here for only about 10 minutes or so. So I'm not sure about whether this car could be considered to be comfortable in any way really, because it certainly doesn't have the best ride quality in the world. And yeah, these seats aren't the best. But the best thing, sunroof. You have the world to play with. That's brilliant. I love that. I love sunroofs in cars. Melvin's got a sunroof. Why doesn't your car have a sunroof? Every car should have a sunroof. All-round visibility is brilliant because tiny little pillars that will immediately turn to dust if you ever have a rollover accident. And there's not an awful lot of room in the back. I might have to get in there to show you, mightn't I? Frameless doors are the best things in the world. The word I'm going to use for back here is snug, to say the least. There is no legroom. Obviously the seats just go forwards like that because they all did that in this era. The 1960 Mini that I did has exactly the same thing. I'll put a link to that in the corner. But you are very, very close to the back of the car here. There is no real parcel shelf. You are just in the back of the car. There's loads of headroom, despite no legroom. But no seat belts in the back, obviously, but you do get ones in the front, which are useless and I wouldn't even bother with. if it wasn't for the law. But you do have tiny little ashtrays here. I don't know where you can see that. There you go, that's a bit better. Tiny little ashtrays. Again, are the children smoking really small cigarettes? I don't know.
Although the Herald was the competitor to the Austin Mini and the Ford Anglia, it wasn't the same kind of car. Those two were people's cars, but the Herald was something with a little bit more prestige. It became one of the darlings of affluent Britain in the 60s, when that Triumph name on the front really meant something. And of course the Vitesse oozes style and glamour. It's just gorgeous, and the soundtrack from the straight six and the power it gives is wonderful. Despite its quite obvious shortcomings, I really love this car. Yes, the panel gap's terrible. Yes, it squeaks and creaks and bangs about a bit. And yes, it's really, really noisy and revs at about 3,000 RPM when you're just in the middle of traffic. But it looks so good and sounds so good that as a classic car, as something you're not driving every day, it's utterly brilliant. There are so many things wrong with this car that add to the experience of driving it or being around it in any way. I probably wouldn't daily drive this car, but there are a lot of people out there that still do daily drive Heralds and Vitesses because they have incredibly good parts availability and they're so easy to work on and they're generally quite affordable. And as I've said, that style is timeless. And that's why I think the Herald or the Vitesse is one of the perfect starter classic cars. So that was the Triumph Vitesse. Weirdly impractical and uncomfortable and noisy and unrefined, but God, it looks so cool and God, it sounds so good. So who cares? I want this car just because it's just awesome. If you're a car person, you know exactly why this is brilliant. If you're not a car person, this will never ever suit you, but yeah, this is great. Anyway, thank you very much for watching and hopefully I'll see you in another video.